Hello, and welcome to David Sender's YouTube channel. Um, this is my first attempt at making any sort of YouTube video. I have my dog here, Katie. You can see who is very excited about this podcast right now, obviously. But I wanted to just post something into the world, honestly, just because I think there's a lot of stuff going on right now. And at least for me personally, I'm not okay with a lot of the things that are happening, and I'm feeling a lot of anxiety around it. Um, I listen to, a bunch of information podcasts and things like that. There's Scott Galloway who likes to use the term action absorbs anxiety. He also very much credits that to Dan Harris, who's a writer and podcaster. Um, The original phrase with that of action absorbed anxiety might have actually come far earlier than that. Maybe written in the 1960s or so by Dr. Howard Rusk, who was actually crediting an earlier 20th century neurologist named William Spiller. But either way, feeling a lot of anxiety with a lot of the things kind of going on in the world right now. And so this is my at least one of my steps towards action in terms of trying to relieve some of that anxiety and just kind of get some thoughts out there, get some thoughts back from anybody who's willing to listen to this. I'm sure I'll have to work on a different name for this recording, YouTube channel, podcast, whatever it's going to end up being, but this is my first go at it. So again, I have Katie, who's here just to kind of support me a little bit. There's not a whole lot that phases her, so hopefully she can just kind of help us out. And if there's anything that I'm saying that you don't want to listen to, at least you have a pretty face on next to me here that you can um, take a look at. So I think this first recording is probably going to be just kind of getting some things off of my mind, maybe talking about some topics that we'll discuss in the future if I keep doing this. Um, and I just kind of wrote down some notes before this. We'll see, how this kind of all lays out. But I think one thing right now, the first thing that I wrote down is politics stuff just seems kind of out of control. It really seems like we're in a particularly partisan time, and it's rather, Congress as a whole and the government as a whole, it seems, is quite weak and ineffectual, and it's a lot of tit for tat, and nothing that really seems to be moving progress forward. We have Congress, both the Senate and the House of Representatives, that seem weak and ineffectual, and they're seemingly doing not much of anything. The only branch of our government that's doing right now is the executive branch, which is continually seizing power from the legislative branch, the congressional branch, all that stuff. Um, and I remember, learning a lot about this stuff way back in, I think it was eighth grade that we took our test of Constitution things. And a lot of the stuff that's going on right now, we'd always learned should not be happening. There, right? There should be checks and balances and things like that in place. And it just seems like the entire government and all of politics as a whole really just seems to be getting out of control and trending towards a direction that I think is quite worrisome for the stability of our country as a whole. Um, we've had, a normalization of some pretty awful rhetoric. Obviously, it kind of comes from the top down from there. And, whatever. And I've mentioned it a little bit already, but may as well just jump into some of this stuff. And I suspect a lot of this rhetoric stuff is actually why so many people like Trump and will forgive and support him through anything else. And I think, I just need to point out, not that anybody hasn't already, several people have already, plenty of people have, but the guy that's our president right now, I don't even really like saying his name very much, but he is textbook narcissist. not only being a narcissist who is really just out for himself and is truly narcissistic in every way. We can talk about that stuff a little bit more maybe another time. Um, but he's out for himself. I think that's quite clear. It's him and his close buddies around him. I don't really know why people seem to think that someone like this, or part of the reason that he got elected, is that he was going to be fighting for the average American or the average citizen. And I don't really know how that kind of mindset can be explained to me. We have a multi-billionaire who's, I mean, his history is in what, reality TV, real estate. He comes from plenty of money. It's not like he ever had a struggle. He never had to build anything himself by hand. He's always out to just get the upper hand on anybody else, using and literally abusing everybody in any way that benefits him. So I don't really know why that is the person that we've picked. I think he is, um, he's a good showman, but he's not, and probably even a good reality TV star. He likes to make headlines, likes to be in the public eye. Again, this goes back to a lot of that narcissism that he just feeds on and has to know that people are thinking and talking about him. But even though he may be good at those things, or even if you want to argue that he's good at business, which I also don't really think is the case, he's terrible at policy, and that's why nothing is getting done. He's great at making headlines. He's great at kind of sparking debate and controversy when there didn't need to be, and probably exploiting anything that didn't need to be exploited either. But he is terrible at policy, and I think that's pretty representative in the entire presidency that he had the first time as well as his second time. His entire government, his cabinet seems to just be using their positions, using their power, and exploiting the American tax dollars for their own personal gain. And this is continually being normalized with this awful rhetoric that's being used. Um, I think going back to that rhetoric stuff, this is what makes people kind of forgive Trump, is that they may have some of these thoughts. They may be feeling left out, or somehow the world is against them, or they have biases or bigotry or anything towards other groups of people. And he has normalized that. He has made it okay to externally verbalize these things and act on them. And that's, I think, part of why we're seeing so much of what we're seeing in the news today with, different shootings and things like that are just getting worse and worse. And that's, another problem that we're having here in the States that nobody seems to be wanting to address at all. And that's concerning to me. But I think he normalizes those people where they would normally feel some sense of shame or guilt, or even being ostracized from society for not having what the general public thinks is normal. He's now normalizing this, and that makes them feel better. They don't have to feel that shame anymore. They can even be prideful, and I would argue he's even promoting it because I think he enjoys it. I think he enjoys the chaos that it brings, and I think his cabinet is doing the same kind of things with just creating chaos and exploiting the American taxpayers for their own personal gain. And that's not okay, and it's not something that we should be okay normalizing. I mean, it just the other day I read a news article, and I'm sure plenty of people have heard about this, but J.D. Vance, our vice president, for his birthday went kayaking on some river and had the FBI or whoever it was that were the Secret Service, I don't know, somebody, um, raised the level of the river so that he could go kayaking or whatever he was doing down this river. That that is absolutely absurd to me. Our vice president of the entire United States of America is literally abusing our environment, using taxpayer dollars to increase the level of a river. What justification is there for that kind of action? Government is there for providing services and thinking long term. They're not there for headlines. They're not there for their personal gain. They shouldn't be benefiting from the offices that they're holding. They are public servants, and that's what the government is. The government is a public service. They are supposed to be thinking long term and the greater good for everybody, not the greater good for the president or the vice president or their friends or the other billionaires that are giving them lots of money. That's how our current government is operating. It seems like there's three ways to get things done with Trump. I'm saying his name there. You can either stroke his ego, you can stroke his pocket and try to bribe him because he's perfectly willing to take that and has made it abundantly clear that you can have a meeting with him for $1 million and your son can be given a pardon for murdering people or for you know um, uh, just cheating people out of money or whatever, escaping the system. That's another story that happened. But you can either stroke his ego because he loves that as the narcissist that he is. You can stroke his pocket because all he likes is money, basically, and power. Or the other thing that's rather crude is it seems like you can stroke his dick, and that also seems to get him going. And again, this is the person that we've elected to our highest office, and I just think it is not okay that these things are normalized and they continue happening. And I don't know if there's anybody out there in different positions than I am that are actually trying to do something about this, but I feel like all of these things continually happen. I, as an average citizen, am not in control to do anything about them, and I'm not okay with how this is going. I think things need to change in our government and with the way that people are responding to other people right now. I also think there's really no leadership in the Democratic Party. I don't know, what happened. I do consider myself a pretty moderate person. I've never really, and honestly, at different times in my life, I've subscribed to being somewhat Republican, somewhat Democratic. I do like to think that I'm a bit progressive, but I've always been fairly conservative when it comes to money things and even some social practices or social programs. Um, but right now, it seems like we have one party that is able to actually keep themselves organized and controlled and has some leadership, and that's not the Democratic Party right now. That's the Republican Party. And without that two-party system, at least in the US, which is what, again, our system is based on, at least having two parties, without that push and pull to balance each other, one party gets to take it away, and then we see changes that are not necessarily good for the greater good. Honestly, they're not necessarily okay for the average citizen. They tend to just go down one track and just a handful of people's ideas, and that's what we end up with. Um, we've seen that a number of times throughout history. And right now, this two-party system is seemingly falling apart because we have basically just one party kind of running away with it, and it's quite disappointing to see. I think without leadership, the Democratic Party, I don't know really if they're going to be able to win the midterms, but then what's going to happen after that? They still don't have a plan. Doesn't seem to be that longer term thinking that the government should be doing. And I just kind of have to ask, what if this rhetoric, this partisanship, this tit for tat MAGA bull um, if that all just doesn't become more than a blip in our history of the United States, what happens if that stuff stays more stagnant and more permanent? Um, that's not a country, honestly, that I want to live in. I think the United States is better than that, and I think the people of the United States deserve that. That's, they deserve the American dream. They deserve the ability to come over here and not feel persecuted or prosecuted or biased against even. And I'm worried some of that is becoming far more permanent than it should have been based on this administration. It seems like the government is really kind of going out of its way to alienate all of our allies that took, I mean, literal decades to create. Before World War II, really, the United States just didn't have these kind of allies in the way that we've had it since then, and it took decades before that to get to that point that we could create these relationships and these trusted cooperations, I guess, with different countries. And then it took more, like, after World War II, it took decades after that to solidify all of these relationships. And a lot of that has come down in the last 6 months. I mean, a lot of those relationships are terribly damaged right now. And I think that's going to open the way for other countries to start doing better than the United States. If the United States wants to stay a leader on the world stage, it needs to do better than what it's doing right now. And this administration needs to be better. They need to be representative of what we want to display to the rest of the world. Right now, it seems like we are the laughing stock and jokes for the rest of the world, while they just kind of create better relationships amongst each other, leaving the United States out of it because this administration is seemingly going out of its way to alienate all of those relationships, all of those allies, all of those friends that took literally decades to create and solidify. And because of all of this distraction, we've completely turned away from or forgotten about or moved on from literal global disasters like climate change, which is I don't really care how you want to define it or what your beliefs are. The climate is changing. Whether that's mostly man-made or not doesn't really matter. The climate is changing, and that is easy to see. And a lot of the ocean life is dying. A lot of the land or terrestrial stuff is also starting to change and adapt to the new world. And if we don't adapt with that, or if we don't slow this change down, I mean, I think humans are a very adaptable species, but a lot of the other animals and plants and things like that on Earth are not as adaptive as we are, and we're going to lose all of those. And again, that's something that our government should be worried about. They're the ones that should be making those longer term decisions and plans. And it's not happening right now. Everything right now seems to be each person kind of out for themselves or their best buddies to try to get what they need, and everybody else can just be left by the wayside. And it doesn't really seem to matter if we're destroying our planet at the same time, because this is the only one we have. And Elon Musk can talk as much as he wants to about going to Mars, but that planet also is not really supporting life right now, and maybe 100, 200 years from now we can get there. But that's not going to change what's going on right now on Earth. And these are things that we need to be worried about. These are things that are happening right now. And instead of making a plan or trying to band together or work with our allies to address this, we are just creating distraction after distraction after distraction for the personal gain of the people that are in power right now. And that short-sighted thinking is, again, inappropriate to me. That leaves every generation after screwed over because you don't want to deal with with the mess that you've made. That's like Asking, I mean, honestly, that's like taking your grandfather out to a club with a bunch of his old friends. They trash the place and leave you with the bill. Then they've gone off and their own thing. That's what we're doing right now. And honestly, a lot of the political things are doing the same thing right now. This bill that was passed somewhat recently in Congress. I don't even like to say the name because it is a big bill. It is not the other words they like to use for it. That is the I think the single most ridiculous transfer of wealth from the poor to the wealthy or the young to the old that has ever happened in this country or possibly even the world. I don't know. Um, but it's short-sighted, it's selfish, and it's irresponsible. And it seems like we don't care because we're just distracted by absolutely everything else that's going on. And I think this is also getting into the tremendous wealth gap that's continuing to worsen and accumulate here in the United States. The middle class, from everything that I've heard and read and looked into, the middle class is struggling right now and it's disappearing. And the middle class, honestly, it's not a naturally found thing in the world. If you look in history, even, I mean, you go back as far as feudal times in the UK or Great Britain or whatever you want to call it, or in Europe. Again, these are things that I learned about a long time ago in high school. These are things that we were supposed to learn from in history class. With the feudal system, you have the people at the top who get everything, and you have the people at the bottom who serve those at the top, and that's it. And without active work, without striving and making changes so that you can create a middle class, it doesn't exist. There's the high and the low, the rich and the poor, and there isn't a middle class if you don't try to create it. It is not a naturally occurring thing. And I think here in the United States, at least, and honestly, pretty much everywhere in modern times, you've seen the rise of the middle class because we've gone out of our way to create it. And that means you need equal, not equal, but you need appropriate taxation and appropriate social programs or whatever to promote this middle class and to let it thrive. And the middle class, at least in America, has done some unbelievably amazing things for this country. That is what the country has been, at least in the last 50, 60 years, has been built on. And it's disappearing. The wealth gap is exceedingly getting more and more evident. Um, and this is something that we need to address. And right now, anybody that's in power is just making that worse. All we've done with anything that's been passed so far, any executive orders, is just making that wealth gap even worse. The poor are getting poorer, the rich are getting richer at the expense of the poor, and that's creating a whole bunch of other problems like depression and obesity and all that kind of stuff. The healthcare system in the United States is a problem as well, and the poor don't have access to it. If you don't have a middle class, you can't have adequate healthcare. You're not going to have adequate healthcare because that's what the healthcare is predominantly going to affect. They're the ones that are going to pay for it. The wealthy can pay for any sort of healthcare that they need. They can honestly take a jet to Switzerland or whatever and get some procedure done. The poor can't do that. They're increasingly using emergency hospitals, and those are getting overrun. Instead of having standard preventative care, they're using emergency things only when they have to. Not only is that an expensive way of doing it, it's also an incredibly inefficient way. And if we can't support the middle class who keep the healthcare that we have in the States kind of running, then again, it's only going to get worse. So I didn't really intend for this to be a rant. I guess it kind of turned into a rant. Hopefully in future episodes or future recordings, we can kind of discuss more things that are going on. Right now, I'm just going to, I guess, leave with one last thing is that it seems to me right now, and really kind of the biggest thing that made me sit down today and record this video is that decency is dying. And I know every generation has said this in different ways to some degree, but that doesn't change how it feels right now, and it doesn't make it any less real or any less concerning. And so, if you're like me, I'm happy to hear any support, critiques, thoughts, any other subjects if you want to hear about. Hopefully, in the next several videos or whatever, I'll start dissecting some more of these things and see if some of this stuff maybe can relieve some anxiety for anybody else that's feeling a little bit upset about what's going on in the world right now. Um, and if you like this video, I apologize for the product or the quality of it. It's probably not great. This is my first attempt. Hopefully the next ones will be better, but I'm happy to hear any comments, thoughts, anything like that at all. Um, and if you like this video, if you think this rant was okay, go ahead and subscribe to my channel or hit like or whatever it ends up being. But I just wanted to kind of throw this out there. And if there's anybody else who's having concerns, know that you're not alone. I'm happy to hear from you. Katie, who's already asleep through this, I'm sure would also love to hear about it. And with that, I'll talk to you next time.